it is possible to pursue almost any dream. The thing that we have to have is patience, determination, fortitude, and realism, right?
Yep.
Realism of the amount of repetitive steps it takes of things that are not always easy, not necessarily sexy, but just long, persistent dedication and commitment to a cause or an effort or a goal is often the thing that distinguishes people who realize a dream and those who give up and don't. Hi, this is Jane Biondi Munna, and you're listening to Dreams and Drive.
Hey Dream Drivers, welcome to episode 348 of the Dreams and Drive podcast. And I'm super excited for you all to hear from today's guest, Jane Biondi Munna. So Jane currently is a managing director at JPMorgan Chase. She has served for over a decade there in roles across finance, strategy, marketing, and communications, including as the executive communications partner to the co-president and CEO of the firm. One of the things that's special about this interview is we're also going to be talking about one of her projects that she undertook during the pandemic, where she was the co-author of Let's Be Frank, A Daughter's Tribute to Her Father, the media mogul you've never heard of. It was chosen as a Publisher's Weekly Book Life, editor's pick, and I think what is really special about it is, to me, it's kind of like a love story to her father and how his impact as a media mogul during the transition of media and cable industries really impacted who she was and also inspired a lot of her character and how she approaches life and business. So for anyone who has had a parent who has had a tremendous impact on who they are today, I think that you will really enjoy hearing Jane speak about her father, his legacy, and all that she hopes she's able to do along her own dream driving journey years from now. If this is your first time listening, please make sure that you're following us. You can find us at Dreams and Drive across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And make sure that you're also on our email newsletter, The Keys, and getting weekly email updates delivered right to your inbox. If you want to sign up, just go to dreamsanddrive.com/join. That's dreamsanddrive.com/join. All right, let's hear from Jane.
Thanks for having me, Raina. I appreciate it.
I am so excited. As we were talking offline before getting this started, we have so many similarities, right? So, we're going to be talking about your dad, Frank, and he was a former CEO of Viacom at the time. I work at Paramount now, which is kind of like the holding company for all of everything that Viacom acquired over the years. We also are both Princeton alum. Your dad was also a Princeton alum, right? Go Tigers. I'm a proud Princeton alum, class of 2013. And we have a connection. Your dad has a connection to Orange, New Jersey, which is the hometown that I grew up in. So this is going to be a great interview.
Indeed.
So I like to start our interviews going back in time. I think it's very telling to kind of talk about who we were as children and how that kind of inspired us today. So let's take it back to the 8-year-old Jane, right? Like, what was inspiring you as a child? And what were the things that were really lighting you up about the world?
It was a great question, and I thought a bit about it in preparation. There were a handful of things that I found inspirational, and I think they each provided a different kind of inspiration. So I was very interested in computers because they were sort of rare at that time. You had them in school, people had them at work, but we didn't get exposure to them in the way that folks have exposure to them now, particularly young children. So learning how computers worked and designing things that you could print out, I really thought was kind of magical. So I was very interested in technology at that time. I'm still interested in it, but not in the same way that it drove my curiosity and understanding how things worked. But I was also really inspired more generally by live performances, people showcasing their skills, whether it was musical performance or sports in particular. I used to love to go watch the Mets because my dad loved baseball, so he used to take me, and I loved to play tennis. So I was in awe of folks who were good enough to perform for other people. And I had wished as a kid that I could be good enough at something one day to make someone else feel that way, right?
Yeah, and I know you grew up in a household just seeing a lot of things happen, right? Just being who your dad was, and we'll get into that. But what do you think was like do you remember what your first dreams were? Like, as a kid, like what was it, the thing that you're like, I want to be this when I grow up?
The only pure dream like that I ever had was to be a professional tennis player. The notion of playing in the US Open to me was the peak of existence. And it was clear to me pretty early on that I didn't have the natural talent to do that. And I didn't have the opportunity to really try and pursue that dream in the way that I understand now as an adult, that one has to devote themselves to do that. So it was never a realistic dream, but it did inspire me to play lots of tennis and try and be my best. And I played at Princeton for a few years.
So, one of the things that I guess we can introduce who your dad is, I think that's going to kind of frame how we talk about your journey and then about what you did in order to honor him. So your book that you released is called Let's Be Frank. And I'm going to read the headline from here. A daughter's tribute to her father, the media mogul you've never heard of, right? I never heard of him before, right? And I work at Paramount, but I don't really know like the history of the CEOs and stuff like that. So tell our listeners in a quick, sentence or two who your dad is. And then I want you to I don't want this to be like your journey in reference to him, but I kind of want to use it to frame how we'll talk about your journey, all right? And then his journey as well.
Great. So my dad, Frank Biondi, was a media executive in the age of the development of cable television, which is important in the sense that it was one of the big innovations in entertainment. It led to all of the things that we take for granted today. But it was the beginning of on-demand content, so that you didn't have to wait for a show to be on TV, or you didn't have to wait for a movie to be in a movie theater to buy a ticket. You could watch a first run movie on, Tuesday night when it was on cable after it had been in the movie theaters and before you could rent it on a video cassette. So it was uncharted territory in terms of entertainment. And he had a front row seat at a time where other people didn't understand how the industry made money, didn't understand what customers would be willing to pay for. So he and his colleagues and peers at the time had a really unique opportunity, both from a work perspective, but also in terms of like charting the course of media as a business model. That laid the foundations for a lot of what is in the news and buzzy today, including like streaming wars and things like that. And he had a lot of really interesting lessons as well as kind of anecdotal stories about that time that I had encouraged him for a long time to write a book, because history gets lost unless people document it. And I thought his experience was interesting to regular people, in that my dad was somewhat of a regular guy, both from his upbringing, his aspirations, how he sort of fell into that line of work through some good luck, some happenstance, and just hard work, and how it led him down a path that I don't think he ever could have imagined. So speaking of dreams, right? He made his own American dream for sure. And I had an interesting seat in watching him go through that, particularly as I was old enough to appreciate what it is that he did for work. And then he got ill with cancer. And so it sparked me to want to document those stories in a way that would survive him. So it became less about sharing his lessons about an interesting time in the media world, which was still a motivation of mine for sure, but a bit more about finishing what we started while he was alive and just respecting his legacy.
And after, reading the book, to me, I saw it as a love story in not saying a weird way, right? But I'm like, wow, like you, especially the way that you wrote it, where there's parts like, you have like his thoughts where he's speaking, and then you have your commentary and other people's commentary. It made me think, as like, I want to say I'm a fairly new mother. My son is 2, all you guys know. It's like, I hope that one day my son, I'll be able to share all these lessons, and he'll be willing to help, my story and our legacy live on. So I just want to say that it was a really phenomenal read, and just seeing how much, it was very evident how much you loved your father and how much he loved you. I do have a question. You're the youngest, right? Was your dad the youngest? What was his? He was the eldest. He was the oldest of 3. Yes. He had a brother very close in age who he was super, super close to growing up. They were, I think, only a year and a half apart, though I don't know the exact. And then a much, much younger brother who was in kindergarten when my dad went away to college. Oh, wow. So his
Yeah.
parents were like, oops, or whatever that.
Well, interestingly, quite unfortunately, his youngest brother, Michael, passed away before my dad did, very unexpectedly, because he was so much younger. We all assumed that he would be the one to outlive them all, given their age difference. So my dad eulogized Michael and told the story that their mother had been told she couldn't have any more children. So it was less of an oops and more of a kind of wonderful surprise, completely unexpected.
Luck, right? He talks about luck a lot and just things that happen by chance, but you take those opportunities and you run with them, right?
Exactly. So. And that his parents let my father and his near an age brother name their little brother. So I forget, I should ask my aunt. But one of them chose Michael and one of them chose James. And those were the first and middle names of his younger brother.
That's really nice. Going into Princeton, knowing that, do you think, I guess you were 18 around that time, 17, 18, right? As it going into freshman year, did you have a sense of what your father did for work? Or was it still kind of nebulous to you? He does something in media. And then how did that inform how you viewed college, right? Because I know your dad was very big on making sure you had your own opportunities. But did you go into college thinking I need to get this out of this school?
It's a great question. So by then I absolutely was aware, because in high school was the time of that major battle to purchase Paramount, which was all over. At the time, cable news had become a thing. So there was 24/7 business content. It was on the cover of the business section that was on the kitchen table when I was in high school. So I came to be aware not only of what he did, but also kind of the spectacle of the industry that he was in and how people cared about it in a way that I didn't understand until that particular moment in time. And so that was my sophomore year in high school. So by the time I went away, yes, I was absolutely aware. I wouldn't say that it dictated at all what I expected of myself out of college. If anything, I appreciated starting in an environment where I was more on my own and less a member of my family, if that makes sense, where you can make choices without or with less kind of preset expectations from your parents or your community or your school. I went to a school here in the city where I actually met my husband, and you go there for so long. The teachers know you, they know your parents, they know your siblings.
Was it the Spence school?
No, we went to a school called Fieldston, which is incidentally...
that's in the Bronx, right?
Yes.
I went to Dwight Inglewood. So I think we ran there for cross country. You guys are near some big park, right? In the Bronx.
Yes, Van Cortlandt Park. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yes. I've been trying to remember the name of that park for the longest. Yes.
Van Cortlandt.
Many a trails in Van Cortlandt Park. So
terrific. Small world again. So yes, I appreciated that. And, I knew my dad had gone there. It was another dream to kind of follow in his footsteps, just because, as you mentioned, I had great respect for him and reverence as a person and how he worked really hard to accomplish the things that he cared about doing, but also had the right perspective, right? Not everyone has the opportunity to even pursue the things that he had to, which he instilled in us, right? That everything needed to be earned and nothing was, to be given and all of those sorts of lessons. Yeah, exactly. Which I go into a lot in the book. And one of the questions you had sent along was, what have you learned in the corporate world versus what did he teach you about the corporate world? And I think that the thing that's been most interesting to me about working 20 years in corporate life is how rare the very basic but fantastic lessons he taught me are among corporate America in general, right?
We got to go back to that. That is, because I see it too, right? Haven't been in the corporate world for 20 years, but there's some things that you just think should be
common sense, commonplace, right? And I always like to assume positive intent, right? That people think that they can't be that way, or there's not an opportunity to be that way and be respected and be taken seriously, right? People tell themselves stories or, explain away reasons why they can't be kind and thoughtful or respectful of anyone, regardless of their level in the organization. So I would say that his lessons of people really want to work with folks they like and trust was something that I assumed everyone agreed with or knew or understood. And it's kind of rare. And I found it to be something that is distinguishing, right? The number of people who say, wow, it's just so refreshing, how kind and thoughtful. And, you asked me how I was doing when no one else did. Oh, it's just kind of how I always operate. I always think it's funny and I snicker when people comment on it. But if that's a thing to be known for, I'll take it.
I know, so post-college, you kind of went into the sports marketing world, right? Because you were really big into sports. What was that like your first few years out of college and really trying to figure out who is Jane and what does Jane want to do? Because I feel like a lot of us struggle with like those first few years are kind of like a culture shock. We're adults now, and I'm saying that in quotations if you guys are listening. It's hard. And you have a parent, you have, a successful father. He probably wasn't putting pressure on you, but you might have been like, I gotta figure something out, right?
Yeah, it was hard, not any harder than it is for anyone else, right? But your point is a good one. You get out of college, and I think in this country, in our society, there's sort of this expectation that having taken those steps on the ladder is just going to lead you where you need to go. And that's not so. You really have to put a lot of thought into it. And interestingly, I didn't put a lot of thought into it. I kind of followed the career services, do this interview. Everyone's going into consulting or investment. Services. Did you really? That's so good. They do a wonderful job. But I first went into investment banking because it's what all the other economics majors did straight out of school. And I really didn't like it. I didn't like the culture at the time. It still wasn't heavily represented with women. So I was one of the very few women that I could look up to or saw that I wanted to be like. I sit there and think, I don't particularly see a path for myself based on what I see in this organization. And you had to do a lot of work at night. There were sort of these norms around how the work got done, be available 24/7, which I understood loosely, but not exactly what that was going to be like. And 9/11 happened during like about 15 months after I graduated from college. And it shattered the world, but it shattered industries like investment banking. We went into a brief recession. So I actually decided to go back to business school as a reset opportunity. And that's when I went into sports, thinking, I'd like to pursue my dream, right? If I can't myself be an athlete, maybe I can work in an industry that seems close enough to it, right? And have that be my dream. And I go into that a bit in the book, in that it was absolutely a dream of mine. And I struggled with, at what point have you realized your dream and it's okay to move on from it?
Hey, dream drivers. Ever since becoming a mom, life has changed for me in so many ways, and I've learned so much about what it takes to be a mother. One of the things I realized early on in this dream driving journey was how important having the right tools, aka diapers, in my toolkit is. When it comes to changing those dirty diapers, for me, it's all about making the smartest choice. I need reliability and quality, and Pampers gives me that. You may save a couple cents on other brands, but will you save time and convenience? Who wants more leaky diapers, more laundry because poop stains are not fun? And better yet, diaper rash? Not me. I don't worry about that with Pampers. There are other things you can save on, but honestly, your baby deserves the Pampers experience. I've sworn by Pampers with my son for the past 2 years. It's gentle on his skin, and I can trust that they can hold up throughout usage. As a busy dream driver already juggling so much, your diapers choice should be easy and worry-free. Make sure you download the Pampers Club app today to start earning free diapers. Dream drivers, Walgreens knows you need your medications, but sometimes what you really need is a prescription for more time with your family or friends, or just more time to do what you want on a Saturday afternoon. That's why Walgreens offers same-day RX delivery to where you are. So you can get more than just your meds. You can get your prescription to save time at the pharmacy. And when you have pharmacy questions, which let's face it, we all do, Walgreens will be there for you with a helpful 24/7 pharmacy chat. So when you need to know, which med do I take before bed again? Or, is it safe to have a glass of wine with my prescription? You can ask a Walgreens pharmacy expert that question no matter where you are or what time of day it is. And that gives you more than just answers. It gives you your prescription for peace of mind. Delivery is available on eligible prescriptions only. See details at walgreens.com/prescription delivery.
Yeah. You don't have to stick with something forever in order to say that you've accomplished what you set out to do. And so I worked as an intern and then as a full-time employee in a Major League Baseball franchise for about 4.5 years. And it was fantastic. It was a life-changing experience for lots of reasons, right? It was unexpected, the things I got to do at a young age, right? In many sense, these organizations are small companies, right? And if you're willing to take on something, they're happy to let you run with it, which,
Yep.
When you're in your 20s is unusual. But it was exciting. I worked with great, energizing people. You got to see folks who'd accomplished their dreams, right? These athletes are so talented. And the folks who had come before, right? I worked for the Los Angeles Dodgers, who had the great perspective of integrating Major League Baseball and signing Jackie Robinson. And so we got to honor his widow, Rachel Robinson, every year. And she is still alive and such an inspiration. I got to meet her a number of times, to meet many of the former Dodgers who played for the Dodgers in Brooklyn, who were nearing the end of their lives. Yeah. So there's history there too. And it was a wonderful experience. But I also thought, gosh, am I going to be able to pursue the other things that I have in mind for my life if I'm working, all the time during the day and then at night when we had games? It was a demanding lifestyle in a way that I hadn't anticipated, and ultimately made the choice to find a way to get into a more balanced profession.
What were the other things that you had, you saw for yourself? Or maybe the question is what were you learning about yourself, and what were your needs as a person, as a woman, as a professional? What was that like for you?
Oh, lots of things. Again, going back to the comment that I had internalized that if you kind of take the steps that are in front of you, the rest will sort of make itself clear. And it became very clear to me first upon graduating from college, but then with every choice you make, that you really have to be the driver of what's next.
Right.
You have
you
to
are the front
define
seat in your car. The front seat of your car.
Exactly. Right. And what is your dream? And what does success look like in your mind, right? Because we tend to adopt definitions of success that belong to others or are kind of fantastical, right? Like societal definitions of success, like being a movie star or being famous or being, an athlete, or all these things that we believe to be the pinnacle of achievement or earning of others' respect. And it's not so that you have to be one of those things in order to feel accomplished and fulfilled and so on. So I'd say the lessons for me were, I had to decide what I wanted to pursue, but that if you were willing to take the steps to pursue it, you could absolutely achieve those things. So in many ways, getting that job was an example of that, right? Working as a grad student in a minimum wage internship was sort of unusual, but I understood and accepted that that was something that you needed to do to get your foot in the door to do one of these jobs. And I was fortunate to be in a position where I could do that. Right.
Yeah.
If I was not in a position to be able to work for Spit, I wouldn't have been able to pursue that dream. And I fully acknowledge that that is just good fortune and good luck and privilege and all of those things that we've learned to call it, which is just what it is. So there is luck, and there is a lot of factors that go into pursuing dreams, but that's not to say that it can't be done without those things. It just meant that it was easier for me to do it than it might be for others. And then deciding what success looks like. And it took me a while to wrestle with the notion that I didn't have to have my whole life in that job in order for me to call it successful.
And your
and
dad
once I gave
about
myself
that in the book too, right?
Exactly. And having the freedom then to say, okay, I've done this. I can be proud of it and not have to see it through to the absolute nth degree in order to feel good about that was freeing. And it's stuck with me too, right? That a dream is a dream until it's not working for you anymore, or it's not providing the things that you thought it might, at which point you reevaluate. And so some of the other things I had in my mind as I continued working there was, gosh, in order to have a family, you need to meet someone and spend time with someone. And all I was doing was spending my time at work, which I loved and enjoyed. But it was certainly, I didn't see a way that I was going to fit those other goals into my life. And I came to accept that that was not something that was just going to materialize. It was something that I had to prioritize as much, or frankly, more than my job. And I do think that's one of the disservices that we do to young women, is that in sending the message that you can have it all, even if it's maybe not all at once, that to suggest that you can invest your everything in your career or your education or your business, whatever you choose, and not devote at least as much attention to the thing that you care about in your personal life is unfair, because at least for a period of time, you need to be investing as much in your kind of personal dreams as you are in your professional ones. And I don't think that men need to spend that same level of effort in pursuing
it's
their
a little
personal
bit
dreams.
easier for them. And I also feel like even with my peers, and I don't know how it was like with your college peers, so many people are like, we're now approaching, so we're in our early 30s now. And a lot of them are like, wait, I've spent all this time and like my ovaries are going to dry up sooner, right? Like I have to actually meet someone. And it's like, they feel like time is running out. And it's one of those things where it is a reality I think for women, especially. It's like, how do you find that balance? Because you still want to have the career, you still want to have the family. And it's just something, like you said, I don't think men have to think about it as much, but for some men too, right? It's also reality, but they have a little bit more time. I feel like their clocks don't tick as fast as our clocks.
That's true. And it's a reality, and it's unfortunate that it is a reality. I think other cultures do better with this, in that they accept women having children younger and relying on multi-generational households to help raise children, right? Our notion of like each man and woman for themselves is the ultimate sort of American definition is wonderful in the sense of like economic prosperity, but definitely the opposite of what it takes to like raise a healthy family. And I think we saw that in the COVID pandemic, right? Like people managed by moving in with other generations so that when kids couldn't go to school, there was someone at least to keep an eye on them and make sure that they were safe. And I hope that lesson sticks with people, that, most cultures are built on, young people having kids, grandparents helping in the rearing of children. And I don't know what the American version of that looks like, but it takes more than what I think is implied to young professional women in order to pursue having a family. And I have one child, and I had her in my mid-30s. And we had one because of the timing and the way that it all worked out. And everyone's family is going to be different, and it's going to be different maybe than you imagine, both to the good or to the bad sometimes. But my advice to young women is always just to think about what you want and not set it to one side for a whole decade, because then it can feel quite scary and quite pressured at a later age in your life. Yeah.
From your, do you remember what your dad's perspective was as you were kind of navigating this period in your life, right? Was he sick at this point, or was he still kind of, healthy and doing his own? Because he was doing a lot of things. I'm like, well, your dad was a man of many, many different lives, right?
Yes.
How was his, I know in the book you mentioned that he gave you the advice about, I want to summarize it as, sometimes it's okay to follow the money. Is that the way to summarize it? Like, what was his perspective, given that he was so successful in the media industry and kind of was doing his business thing? How was he navigating you during this time? And then how did you take his advice and then make your own from it?
It's a great question. He was reluctant to proactively give advice because he said to me that he didn't want me to just take his advice as if it was a roadmap for what he was expecting me to do, if that makes sense.
This episode of Dreams and Drive is brought to you by McDonald's. All right, so I don't know about y'all, but for me, I have so many different memories of the McDonald's drive-thru experience. So as a kid, I remember always going with my mom and always asking for fries and a Happy Meal, and her just being like, Raina, you got McDonald's money? And I would say, no, but you do. And then as I grew up, one of my biggest memories of the McDonald's drive-thru was when I was actually pregnant with my son, Axel. I had this period where I was obsessed with McFlurries. And so I will always go to the drive-thru and then ask whoever was ringing me up to add some extra Oreos to my Oreo McFlurry, because that is exactly what me and baby needed. McDonald's always comes through no matter how old I am. Everyone's got their own Mickey D's moments. Go on and make more delicious memories.
Yo, if you thought the McCrispy was bussin', hold up. Bacon and Ranch have entered the chat. Say hello to the Bacon Ranch McCrispy. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. I participate in McDonald's. Limited time only.
Yeah.
So he somewhat overcorrected in that I felt like I was trying to intuit what his expectations were because he was sort of understated about them. But at the same time, he was not attached. He had been so gratified in what he was able to accomplish that I really believe he didn't set expectations for his children to live out something on his behalf in the way sometimes parents do, right? I think of like these little league parents, yelling at the umpires as if, their kids are going to, their careers are going to hinge on their little league experience. He was not that way. He just wanted us to be content and happy and self-sufficient adults. So he was not sick at the time that I was in my early career. That was a very end of his life development. He lived only a little more than a year after being diagnosed with cancer before he passed away. So he was very engaged as much as I wanted him to be. And it tended that I would lean on him for advice when I was really struggling with what the right answer would be. And I don't know if this is just me. I think others maybe do it too, is I tended to catastrophize, it's a word, the end outcome of a choice, right? Well, if I don't do this, then all of these other things are not going to happen. And so it felt, I was putting pressure on myself that was sort of unnecessary or not really there. And he was the one that led me to realize that pursuing a dream is wonderful until it's no longer working for what you thought it would provide you. And that's why I anchor on this notion of like, what is success, right? Because yes, it's successful in that I've gotten the job that I wanted, but if it's going to box you out of doing some other things that are important to you, then maybe it doesn't feel so dreamy anymore. Exactly. And that's where his comment about like, it's okay to pursue something just because it's going to pay you more fairly, whether that's in dollars, in the case of his advice, it was, but also in terms of more time, which is really what I was interested in, having more certainty around my schedule, being able to pursue kind of personal objectives as much as professional ones. And that's ultimately what I did. And it's worked out. I don't know that I knew at the time that it would work out exactly as he meant, but it was very good grounding advice for me, in that he didn't pursue media because he thought it would fulfill a dream. He pursued it because it was interesting to him. And at the time, it was a really dynamic industry where he was able to move up a ladder quickly and be in a decision-making capacity at a very young age, right? He was 42 when Sumner Redstone hired him to be the CEO of Viacom at the time, which is just bananas.
That's like, and you're older than he was when he was a CEO of
yes. Viacom. By like a handful of years. Yes.
Yeah. That's amazing. Like, what do you think looking back? And we can kind of talk about his story a little bit. I feel like there are some like core principles that he had throughout his career that really helped him be successful. And to me, one of the first ones seemed to be relationships. And it's like the people, I think it was like a quote that you had, you have to know who knows you, who I forgot. There was something about like the people who know you are also as important as the people who you know, right? Because those core relationships were kind of what even set him on the ball to success. So let's talk about relationships and how do you think that framed how he was able to be so successful in his career?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in terms of luck, like it was a personal relationship through my mom that led him to getting his job at HBO, which I think he believed to be his kind of career defining job. He had experience working in cable television before that, but it was very specific in kind of finance and accounting, and investment banking. So that was a door just from listening and engaging with personal friends. So I think that was the foundation of what led him to believe in the importance of relationships. And anyone can bring something to you that you can learn from or benefit from. Yes. And this goes back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago in terms of like treating everyone with respect, right? You just never know how you're going to end up in a work environment or a personal environment with someone. And it just doesn't make any sense or take just any extra time to just treat people kindly. Not everyone's going to be your best friend, but you want people to think of you in a way that is helpful and constructive and positive. And it's worth investing in that because relationships define almost everything. And increasingly in this day and age where there's so much information, It's hard to suss out in some cases, even what's true and like what's fact, right? You look at this like AI driven computer and it writes out declarative words as if, of course, everything it's saying is totally true. And it may or may not be. That having relationships with people that you've known that have demonstrated their integrity and that you can trust them is critical. And it's great for connecting to opportunities. If you need advice in an area that you don't know about, leaning on relationships to do that is quite helpful. And it was helpful to me even in getting this book out the door. Like I didn't know the first thing about publishing a book or how to go about it. And at every turn, there was some barrier and I would just figure out who to ask. And sometimes it took some time. Like there were moments where it was completely stalled and I didn't know whether even to continue or how to continue. But eventually I'd always come back to it.
Maybe since you started talking about it, let's go there a little bit. Your dad was sick, right? And tell us the story of what made you guys really team up and say, hey, let's try to start this book in some way. And then we'll go from there. But I want to hear the beginning story from you in person. I read about it, but I want to hear it from you.
Well, I had encouraged him or tried to encourage him to do it for a long time before.
As we all do with our parents, right? Like, we're like, Mom, you need to do that thing. They're like, yeah, I'll get to it. And they never do.
And he used to joke, like, I'll write it when Sumner Redstone dies, as if he had all of this like good gossip to include about him. But Dad was so kind and respectful that like his biggest dig was just saying, oh, he could have done a better job managing his company. There was nothing salacious that he had to share at all. So I had long been trying to encourage him to do it. He was uncomfortable kind of putting himself out there in that way. Yeah. I think sort of felt like it was old news. Yes, it was important to him, but would anyone else care? That sort of defined he didn't take himself too seriously, I guess is how I would summarize that. So it wasn't until he was sort of looking at his own mortality that he saw another reason to try, which is the reason we tried. And I didn't know how long he had. We knew his cancer was very advanced. So over the course of a year, I recorded him, audio recorded actually on an iPad, recounting the anecdotes and stories that he felt would be interesting and valuable to a reader in a book. And you mentioned the dynamic of the way the book came together of my commentary and his. I ended up having to do that because he didn't leave us with a full content that could be a book. He left us with kind of the vignettes that were themselves stories that one can sit and read and glean something from, but they were not arranged in a way that made sense to a reader. It was sort of his chronology of his career. And the chronology I didn't think mattered as much as kind of what someone could take away from them. So the work that I did was organize them in a way that I thought made sense to a reader, which required me to kind of narrate and explain how they were relevant and or where they were in time and space. So I backed myself into what became, and others have called it, like, it's like he and I are having a conversation with each other.
I was going to say that. And that's why I said it's kind of like a love story, right? It's like, I just want to tell you guys about my dad, and then him kind of saying, yeah, it's kind of like, I feel like it was a dialogue. Like you wouldn't even know reading it that you were piecing together things after he already passed. What was it like for you as you were hearing him recount these stories and listening in, and also kind of knowing you may not have that much more time with him? Was it like a bittersweet? Like what was that like for you during those moments?
It was definitely bittersweet in that, thinking about your life changing in such a fundamental way is hard and is sad. I did find it to be a constructive thing to be doing at a time that was hard and sad. So being able to document these things and know that they were going to live on past him, I found actually kind of heartening at a time where I otherwise could have just like lost it altogether. So in that sense, it was something that we shared and got to actually do as a result of the fact that he was sick, right? He wouldn't have knowingly or willingly shared all of that stuff, I think, had he not been faced with such a difficult moment of his own. And there were times where he clearly didn't have the energy to do it either, like even just to sit and talk, which was hard. And there were moments of sitting there thinking like, gosh, am I pushing him too hard here? But it was something he cared enough to do that he did it even when he was uncomfortable. And I really appreciated like that gesture, if only for my daughter who was quite young when he passed away, like to be able to read or even listen to his voice. You know, I have them saved on a Google Drive that I can go back and listen to at any time. And I did a bit actually when I was putting the book together. We had to edit some things out. So his words were his words edited, but then I would go back and say, no, this is exactly how he said it. So I was fact checking some of his stories. It was great to be able to go back and just listen to his own voice.
Were you thinking of the end product during the creation period?
You know, I didn't have the luxury of that at the time. When we started, I was hopeful that we would get it done while he was still alive. I mean, that was the dream. And he had an agent who was representing him, and there was a publisher who was interested. And we worked with a ghostwriter to help turn his recollections into like really quality written words. So like he would prompt my dad for more detail and embellishments and character descriptions and things like that. So it really made the book better. I didn't realize at the time that the content that he left us with was sort of most of a book, but not all of a book. And it found itself across genres, right? It's not purely a business book. It's not purely a history of the media. It's not purely like a father-daughter anecdote. It's kind of a little bit of all of those things. And as a result, it was a bit hard to describe like what it was to a reader, right? Which fundamentally, when you're trying to put together a book, is the very first question you need to answer. But it wasn't what I cared the most about. I was racing against a clock, right? So I spent a lot of the time after he died figuring out how I could answer that question in a way that made sense to publish it.
Yeah, because, I often think, like, I always have this idea of, hey, I want to record my grandmother's story one day. But I have, like, random recordings on my phone, but I haven't actually, like, invested in the full thing. Because you kind of think about, well, this is a really large undertaking. And once he passed, you could have said, we have the stories, that's enough, right? What do you think was fueling you to actually make sure that you completed the journey, right? Like you could have just said, all right, pause, I'm putting it in park now. I don't have that energy to keep going. But it seems like you became even more invested in making sure that it came alive, right?
I considered that, no doubt about it. It would have been easier to do that. The thing that kept me going was I felt like I had committed to my dad that is what we had set out to do. And once he invested his own time at a time that it was hard for him to do so, to share the information, I really felt like I owed it to him to see it through. I don't know that if he were still here, he would have felt the same, right? He might have said, oh gosh, if people aren't showing that much interest, like don't bother. I'm just glad that I did it. But it was important to me to just fulfill that commitment, which was something, honestly, that I learned from him, right? Do what you say you're going to do by the time you say you're going to do it. Yeah. And I'm glad I did, because had I known all of hindsight at the time, I probably wouldn't have bothered, right? There were certain things that were so much harder than I expected them to be. But just by having that end goal, it kept me motivated. And some of your other questions about, is it possible to pursue a dream? Like 100% absolutely. It is possible to pursue almost any dream. The thing that we have to have is patience, determination, fortitude, and realism, right?
Yep.
Realism of the amount of repetitive steps it takes of things that are not always easy. In fact, probably rarely easy, not necessarily sexy. It's not the thing you're going to point to afterward that is the difference maker. But just long, persistent dedication and commitment to a cause or an effort or a goal is often the thing that distinguishes people who realize a dream and those who give up and don't. And I would say having followed through on this only emboldened me and encouraged me to think that there's something else that I'd like to pursue, that it's absolutely doable. It's just about how much you're willing to sacrifice in order to do it. And I do think the COVID pandemic helped me in that regard, in that the things that used to fill up time had gone away. So there was no longer I don't have time excuse, right? Yes, I had a busy job, but we weren't going out to eat. We weren't going to the movies. Like no one was going to summer camp. There was all of a sudden kind of a couple hours here and there that could be devoted. And I scheduled a specific time each week to work on it so that I would kind of keep a list of the things I wanted to accomplish in that time. And sometimes I get through all of it. Sometimes I wouldn't, but it was my commitment to him and to myself. And it took a couple of years, but I got it all done.
I was going to say, I would think one of the biggest hindrances to people putting a dream into drive is like those big mountains and those big challenges. Can you talk us through at least one of the huge challenges that you face, how you got through it, and what you learned from that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest challenge was when the publisher that had agreed to take on the project backed out after he died. I didn't know that there was a way to publish a book without a publisher. Right? To me, that felt like an insurmountable barrier, and that I had to go back out to try and pitch it as a different book to different publishers. But meanwhile, like we had pitched all these publishers in the first round, right? And if the gentleman who wanted the project to begin with didn't want it anymore, like it was probably not likely I was going to find another one. And that was one of the reasons I considered just hanging it up. But I spoke to lots of different folks in and around the publishing world. So, you go back to relationships. I talked to a friend who had published a book of her own. I spoke to a friend of my dad's who had published a lot of notable books, a family friend whose neighbor was a noted business author. It's amazing that when you can state what it is that you're looking for, you need, the number of people who kind of say, oh gosh, I know this person and I'm happy to ask them. Like the worst they can say is no, right? And over the course of 6 or 8 months, I had 3 totally different perspectives on how I could take the project forward. But one of which was similar to the advice in my career that we talked about a while back. Like it unlocked permission to myself, I think, to pursue a path other than what I had had in mind in the beginning, which was essentially that self-publishing is now as viable a way to get a book in the public sphere. And as long as you're not trying to pursue a bestseller, right? Or get it on the New York Times bestseller list, which frankly, was never even in my mindset. I was just trying to complete the project.
You never know.
Oh, you never know. But I would just say that was never part of my must do, right? I wasn't deluding myself about what I was trying to accomplish. And he said, essentially, self-publishing puts the content out in the public record in a way where others can refer to it. And it adds to kind of the general knowledge in the world. And it felt like a really helpful piece of advice where essentially he was saying, you're not conceding by publishing it yourself, and that there are ways to do so that the public at large has no idea the method by which that you published the book, which was something I just didn't know. So I hired an outfit that helped me publish and get the book plugged into Amazon. And they use this new technology now whereby they only print a physical copy when someone orders a physical copy. So I didn't have to commit to buying inventory ahead of time. So it made the dream more accessible to me after the gatekeeper that I believed to be a necessity in the process went away. So I would say one, not letting it discourage me, but 2, to keep at what are the other ways around the problem and giving time to see them through, right? These folks are busy people. It took me weeks and weeks to find time to get to chat with them or even just get them to write me an email that was helpful. And those were some of the moments where I was paused, I would say. But taking it all in and listening to people who have more expertise, I found to be incredibly helpful. And then it directed my kind of efforts and my research in a way that ultimately led to me getting the book published.
And I love that. And I think for our listeners, right, there's more than one way to get to a point, right? And I think a lot of us get stuck on, I have to do it this way and this is the only way. But for you realized there were so many opportunities and you learned, what do you think you learned about yourself in this process, right? You had a great life. You loved your dad. He passed on. You had this dream that you were putting in drive for yourself and also for him in a way too, right? To help fulfill his legacy. How did Jane change? What did Jane learn about herself that you might not have known before all of this?
Oh, it's a good question. I would say it helped me come to terms and be at peace with that transition in my life. being, I had always thought of myself first as a daughter, right? Because when you're coming up, you're defined kind of by your parents. In my case, like especially so, I felt because he was this notable person in my mind, that pursuing the book in a way was like defining my transition to being the primary generation in my life, right? Like I think myself now more as a parent to my own daughter than I do define myself by like where I came from. And part of that was having to just go about this on my own and deciding that I was going to do it and doing it and seeing it through. And I would say it gave me a bit more confidence in my capabilities. It allows me to see through, like think things through in a clearer manner, right? Start with what is the ultimate objective and like, how much does that matter to me? And how much does it matter relative to other things in my life? And that a lot of the things that I had imagined as not possible are things that I kind of think are possible again, as long as I'm willing to take the risk and or sacrifice. And I'm not quite there yet, right? But one of your questions is, you know, what other things might you want to accomplish, right? I've always wanted to work for myself, and I never knew what that would look like. But I allow myself permission to at least imagine what that would look like, and what would it have to meet, what expectations would it have to meet in order to be kind of successful in my mind? And I haven't answered all those questions, but once I do, I think it would give me the confidence to try, right? Particularly once you're in a position where your obligations are in hand and you're not like putting others at risk to do so. So it's a balancing act, but it's mostly given me confidence and shown myself that the value of kind of sticking to things and being relentless in your pursuit of a goal is sometimes just the difference maker.
Yeah, and first of all, you have good genetics, right? So I feel like you might have some good of those good business traits from your father. So if you ever do go the entrepreneurial route, I do feel like you have a great foundation and you can definitely trust your instincts there. And then also too, I think it's so interesting how one thing can build and inspire this new dream within you, right? And I think that's the journey of the journey, is just realizing that you yourself don't even know what's going to happen once you get on it.
100%.
And that's the beauty of it. In order to be a dream driver, you need to have your keys to success, Jane. So can you tell us 3 things that you think every dream driver needs in their toolkit before they hit the road?
I would say a little bit of humility. Like we talked about, it's never going to be exactly the way you imagine it. So just being humble and going with the flow. Patience, for sure. It's also not going to be quick. It probably won't be quick. So not letting yourself get deterred as you meet new barriers or unexpected situations. And then what I just said a minute ago, just being relentless and sticking to it no matter what. Until you decide that what it was you were pursuing no longer meets your needs, right? It doesn't mean be relentless, like down off a cliff, right? If you see that things are not going the way that you want, like being humble enough to say, I need to try another approach, or this is not what I thought it would be, is all part of pursuing dreams.
What would your dad say about this book, you think?
I think he'd be humbled to have a book published about him. I think he'd be proud that we managed to get it finished. And I think he'd be surprised by people's reactions to it, because the feedback that I've gotten is so novel to what I had expected it to be, right? In that I thought he was this underappreciated business executive, but in fact, the most common feedback I've gotten is akin to what you shared, which is, this is her father. And the number of people who said what you said, like, I hope my child thinks and talks about me like you talk about him. That they're reimagining how they're parenting their own children, that I've found to be profound. Like, in fact, a couple of colleagues of mine, particularly fathers of daughters, saying, gosh, I don't engage with my daughter in that way. And maybe I should push myself out of my own comfort zone in order to do that. So I think he'd be humbled by the example that I wrote about in the book, which frankly, I put myself out there in a way that made me a little bit uncomfortable, including my own personal stories. Then you realize what you imagine the risks of doing that are very small. Like, people just don't care that much. And I say that in a way to be permissive to people, right? They care. If they're buying the book, it's because they care about reading it, and they accept that it's going to come with hearing what you have to say. It's not as though you're imposing your will upon the whole world, right?
Exactly.
They don't have to read the book. And so that was also a wonderfully freeing sort of lesson that I learned in the whole process, that like, you can go pursue your dream, and if you fail, no one's going to care. And if you succeed, only a handful of people are going to care too. And they're the people who care about you now, you know?
That's so true. And I was trying to remember the question that I had. It's like, the thing that most of us don't realize when it comes to building anything, I asked people this question. I've had like over 300 guests on the show, and I always ask them, like, what's the biggest hurdle to success, or what's the biggest challenge? And a lot of them often say it's like myself. It's the things that you think, like, sometimes you don't even realize what the lesson is because you're so like caught up in this battle of self. And once you kind of say, all right, I'm not going to let myself get in the way, so many things unfold. And it's really about the impact that you have on people. And everyone will take something different from this book, which is what I even love about podcasting, right? So you're sharing your story here now. Me and you are talking, but whoever's listening to this, there's probably one sentence that they'll remember from this whole entire interview, but that's the nugget that they took away. And that's all right, right? It might not be the thing that you and I remember, but it's what they remember. And I think that's what's really so important and so beautiful about dream driving.
Yes. And that's what's valuable to that person, right?
Yeah.
And you understanding what's valuable to you in the process, but then also what's the value that dream is going to provide to others, which is ultimately the thing that will allow it to perpetuate, right? And to succeed. And it's all intertwined. Like, all of the lessons in the book go back to essentially like adding value to other people, whether it's a daily kindness or just being respectful when plenty other people don't bother. And just doing the hard work, right? Doing plenty of reading, making connections, whether they're relationships or connections between facts and trends and themes. You can add value in a regular everyday job in a lot of ways that distinguish you and provide both opportunity and luck can drive its own opportunity. I've felt like his lessons were very empowering in the sense that almost anybody can do the things in their life that he professes and make their lives more fulfilling and better.
Well, thank you so much, Jane. I definitely co-sign everything you said. And readers, I'll put a link to this in our show notes if anybody wants to get this for themselves. Let's be frank. There's so many lessons just on, I think, what it takes to, as you said, your dad was like a pioneer during the time when the industry was changing, right? And even now, I feel like we're in a period within this generation. Is AI the next big thing? Like, what's the next big thing? But there are just core principles that you can learn and you can instill in your everyday life that will just help you navigate. And I definitely feel like there's a lot of lessons, especially now that I'm at Paramount. I'm like, listen, I need to get on data. I need to look at the trends. I need to stop being scared of numbers because I hate numbers. I hate math, but just understanding some core stuff will help set you apart and just help you kind of figure out what's next. So thank you so much, Jane. And thank you so much for sharing your story and your father's story. Please tell our listeners where they can find your book and where they can connect with you more if they would like to, learn more about you and what you're doing.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Raina. The book's available everywhere books are sold, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all of the indie outlets as well. Or you can be ordered at any bookstore. Let's Be Frank book is the website about the book, and it has links to all of the other places where the book's available.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jane.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right, so that's the wrap for this episode of Dreams and Drive. I hope you enjoyed our guest's dream driving journey as well as listening to their keys to success. If you love this episode, you know what to do. Please make sure that you are following us. We are at Dreams and Drive across social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So make sure you're sharing this episode, posting it to your Instagram stories, texting it to a friend, sharing on LinkedIn, wherever you are or online. Just pay this forward and share this with somebody. We really appreciate it. And all the sharing that you do helps us grow our community. If you want to join our email newsletter, The Keys, and get weekly updates delivered to your inbox, just go to dreamsanddrive.com/join. That's dreamsanddrive.com/join. And lastly, if you know somebody who would be great for this show, or if you are someone who would be great for this show, please go to dreamsanddrive.com/pitch. I'm always accepting new guests. I'm always accepting new pitches. So I love to see those pitch requests coming in. Keep dreaming, keep driving, and we'll chat again in the next episode. Bye, guys.